So why did I get involved? Well, Adolfo Puricelli was contracted with the United Mennonite Conference in Ontario to come up and try to figure out the needs of Hispanic people in the city, because a lot were coming from war-torn Latin America. I think the conference sort of thought it might be an evolving church, but he very quickly realized that the needs were to help people recover from trauma and to integrate into Canadian society. I think that was around 1985 or so. And in 1986, I was part of a group that figured out how do we continue to support the Puricellis in this mission. And that ended up becoming an inter-Mennonite group at the time. So it was sponsored by Mennonite Central Committee, by the conference, and in addition, we had members from the various Mennonite churches in Toronto as well as Markham. And through that process, we decided to become the Mennonite New Life Center of Toronto, became incorporated, and had a charitable license granted by the Government of Canada. In those years, it was very small. It grew to having 2 employees in addition to the Puricellis, operated out of a house at the corner of Coxwell and Mortimer, right across from the hospital, which then eventually was rented by the conference for them, and then eventually was acquired by some doctors to turn into a house. That house, so we would meet there as a board, and they used that place both for providing services and also for an emerging church. That was the early years, and then after that moved to the corner of Woodbine and Danforth, second floor of a bank building. I remember Adolfo not being pleased with the fact that he was in a capitalistic building, and then eventually in the mid-90s migrated to share a facility with the Toronto United Mennonite Church, and also the emerging, at the same time, the Toronto Mennonite New Life Church. Many of them are the same in terms of settlement services, paid for by the government, eventually or very quickly. But so integration services, the typical long list that you probably have from everyone else now, how it had evolved, but it was basically helping them integrate and helping them overcome the trauma, because many of them came from a war-torn environment. One of the interesting stories, so our board meetings in those early years were, as I said, at the place where the Puricellis lived. And I remember one board meeting being interrupted by a telephone call that Betty took and came back and said that was a call from someone who's a mother who just was informed that her son had been found dead with bullets in his body in El Salvador. Kind of humbling experience for a board, and sort of the reality of what was happening in Latin America at that time. I was chair of the board from its inception in 1986 until 2008, 22 years. So we met roughly monthly, perhaps not, maybe 10 times a year, I would think more so. And in many respects, we were a sounding board for Betty and Adolfo in terms of the issues that they were experiencing, providing advice or suggestions for how to move forward. So it was quite informal. It wasn't a well-structured board that you can think of from a board. It was more of a board that was acting as a reference council. And in those early years, we also helped write grant proposals and provide support generally in terms of. The other interesting aspect of the board meetings while I was still on the board was that not only did we cover the needs of the Mennonite New Life Center, but also had an update in terms of the Toronto Mennonite New Life Church, because Betty and Adolfo were both co-pastors of the church as well as co-directors of the center. And again, as I said, the center I think had for many years just 2 settlement workers, and then started to expand into ESL and other services. I was there during the period of time when it was small, or relatively small. When I left, it was still a relatively small organization, and then it expanded under the next executive director and much more so under Shelley DeMello. In terms of the services that it's providing now, its budget, I'm not sure what it is, I think it's over $2 million, and the number of clients they serve, and they have, I think, 3 or 4 different facilities. So it's grown quite significant, and it's now, what, going on to its 40th year, and it's well recognized in terms of providing these services. One of the members of TUMC, Toronto United Mennonite Church, was passionate about providing needs or transitional housing for women victims or survivors of human trafficking. And the church was going through a planning process and decided that a house that they owned could be modified to handle those needs. At the same time, this was in 2015, I think around 2015. At the same time, and as part of that, Shelley DeMello, who is the executive director of the Mennonite New Life Center of Toronto, also was seeing some needs of that nature. So it came together as a partnership from the beginning in terms of trying to figure out how to provide these services to these women. So that started in 2015. I came onto the board in 2016, and I think it was 2017, after the renovations were done to the house, that Aurora House opened and started to serve clients. And from the beginning, the view was that the services would be provided by staff of the New Life Center. It took a while for that to happen, but recognizing that they had all the experience in terms of trauma counseling, they had all the processes in place, that this is an extension, as opposed to an independent group just starting it all from scratch and having to figure out all of that. This became very, very important, particularly during the COVID time, when the processes were right there. You didn't have to invent them. And you hear about it all. You hear about not just sexual human trafficking, but labor human trafficking as well happens, and it is a need. And the Aurora House evolved to try to recognize where services were needed during a period of time. We were the only place that provided services to either expectant mothers or mothers with young children. But they're not the only people that come into the house and have the counseling services, because the real part there is the integration of the counseling services with the housing. Because again, it's not just like, oh, here's an apartment, you're on your own. These women also are recovering from trauma, just like many of the new immigrants and refugees who are coming from war-torn places. One of the things that was very interesting and unique was how innovative and creative Adolfo was. Adolfo had this great vision of doing lots of stuff. So part of our achievement was to help tone him back down to what is practical and what we can afford to go forward with. But it's also interesting. We tried a program with the support of Immigration Canada to provide a small housing development for new immigrants combined with a settlement worker on site. Happened to be in one of the larger apartments at St. Clair O'Connor Community Center. And that ran for 2 or 3 years, was quite successful. And then of course the government decided, well, this is too small because it's got to be big. And so they stopped that program, but then created huge settlement houses. I'm not sure how successful they were. They probably didn't have the same individual attention and serving the needs that way. But that was an example of the creativity of Adolfo. He also spent many, many days out at Celebrity Inn by the airport with people who have arrived and were put into that center and trying to help them get out and get on with life as well. So again, he picked up the ball and ran with it, and Betty was there supporting him. Funding was always a challenge. And when you see the needs and you want to grow and you need the funding to grow, and the funding really has to come from the government in terms of some of these providing settlement services and funding the workers that do that. So that was one ongoing one. I think the emotional drain and supporting that in terms of that Betty and Adolfo and the team work really long hours. And when you hear some of these stories, we only heard a few of them at a board meeting, but they lived with them day by day. And the frustration in terms of not being able to solve all the problems certainly was an ongoing thing. So again, part of our meetings were to provide that support and encouragement and to move forward. The technical aspect of the annual meeting, you know, moving motions and accepting, was about 10 or 15 minutes. We made sure it was short. And then the rest of it was a celebration of the work being done. And so the next hour, hour and a half, we would hear stories from people who had been served by the center, actual real-life stories. And some of those were very tear-wrenching. And also hearing the celebratory nature of it in terms of music playing and other things. So I think the annual meetings are really quite a highlight in terms of learning more about the program as opposed to just secondhand through the directors or through the staff. The other challenge, the other part that is also is the Mennonite New Life Center served as the basis for supporting various other groups, not just TUMSE but others, in bringing refugees and immigrants to Canada, filling out the applications and getting it processed. That was under, I think Mennonite Central Committee was the first group in Canada to be given this right from the government, and then it expanded beyond that, and then working, because we were supported by Mennonite Central Committee. We had lots of applications. I have no idea how many people were reunited with family as a result of these successful applications done. So that was another aspect of it that's a good highlight too. Well, I mean, to get connected with a settlement agency, I mean, language becomes really important. Language and jobs, and that's a key part. And now, in addition, accommodation, particularly in the city. So I think one of the great needs that the center provides is those three: helping people get connected with jobs, helping them get language studies, or jobs, or going back to school, as well as finding accommodation. And that fits in exactly with what Aurora House is doing for a subset of clients, which are maybe different, but may suffer the same trauma. I think there's several ways. I mean, one way is donations to any of these organizations, because while government provides some funding, they don't provide the funding that make the organization and the support system closer to the individual. It becomes more formulaic, I think, in terms of otherwise. So that's one way. And welcome them. Say hi to them if they're living near you. I mean, that's so important in this country and around the world. They're your neighbor. And if you look at it, they provide, they help the company survive and grow, particularly now when we need immigrants. When you look at the number of jobs that are available for people, we need people to pick that up and run with it. I mean, in a different way, we have another home up on Georgian Bay near Thornbury. And we have a lot of migrant workers coming in for apples and other vegetables, predominantly apple trees. It's the apple orchard of Ontario. I had such a delightful experience the other day. I walked into the local bank, and what a buzz. The migrant workers had come back. The customer service reps were welcoming many of them back by name, and just a positive buzz. And as people came in, they celebrated with these people who had come back to work here and help us. I mean, that's integration. Our family provides support on an annual basis to the center, but also when I was on the board of Aurora House, there was connection to the New Life Center through that, through the newsletters, through other activities. And the good news about Aurora House, it's brought I think, the Toronto United Mennonite Church a bit closer again to the Mennonite New Life Center, because we were very close for years, and then it sort of separated, not separated, but each went their own way, which is fine. But I think this provides the opportunity for a little closer connection.
Yeah.
Hey, it's 40 years from this little program to this very large program that's very successful. It has to continue. And that's the other aspect. So I've gotten to meet, I've had the privilege of meeting some of the folks that work at the New Life Center now through Aurora House, and all of them are passionate about their clients and how do we help them. And we've got some stories there in terms of very, very tough situations where people are working through the entire weekend to try to solve, in terms of potential conflict between a client and either family or otherwise, so that it's not disruptive to their children and other, you know, it's a delight to see the strength and the care. The staff have been chosen very wisely.